The blood-red sunset cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Unionville, Nevada, as Wyatt Garrison rode in, his weathered face as unreadable as a poker player's, and his eyes as haunted as the abandoned mines that dotted the nearby hills. The year was 1878, and while the rest of the country celebrated the nation's centennial, Wyatt had spent the last decade trying to outrun demons that followed him like faithful hounds. His arrival in Unionville wasn't by choice. His horse had gone lame 5 miles back, and the town was simply where his boots had carried him. The local saloon beckoned with the promise of whiskey and forgetfulness. Wyatt pushed through the swinging doors, the familiar scent of cheap liquor and desperation greeting him like an old friend. The pianist played a melancholy tune that seemed to follow the rhythm of his heartbeat. He claimed a corner table, back to the wall old habits from a life he couldn't seem to shed. "What'll it be?" asked the barkeep, a portly man with a handlebar mustache that needed trimming. "Whiskey," Wyatt replied, his voice rough from disuse. "Leave the bottle." As the amber liquid burned down his throat, he surveyed the room through half-lidded eyes. Unionville wasn't much different from the countless other frontier towns. He drifted through a handful of miners, a few cowboys, and locals trying to carve out a life in this unforgiving landscape. What he didn't expect was her. She stood behind the bar, replacing the barkeep who had moved to serve other patrons. Golden hair pulled back in a practical bun, eyes the color of summer sage, and a determined set to her jaw that suggested she wasn't someone who backed down easily. There was something different about her, a quiet dignity that seemed out of place in a saloon. When she caught him staring, she didn't look away as most women might. Instead, she held his gaze steadily, an unspoken challenge in her eyes. "You're new," she said, approaching his table with a confidence that suggested she owned the place. "Passing through or staying?" "Passing through," Wyatt answered automatically, the response he'd given in countless towns across the territory. "That's what they all say," she replied with a hint of a smile. "I'm Eleanor Kane. Most folks call me Ellie." "Wyatt Garrison," he offered, surprised at his own willingness to share his name. Usually he preferred anonymity. "Well, Mr. Garrison, you look like you've been riding hard. We've got rooms upstairs if you need a place to stay." "My horse went lame," he admitted. "Need to find a replacement." "Jacob Green at the livery might help you out," she said, "but he won't be back until tomorrow. Went to Carson City for supplies." Wyatt nodded, resigned to spending at least one night in Unionville. "Guess I'll take that room." As Eleanor turned to fetch a key, a commotion at the door drew their attention. 3 men staggered in, already deep in their cups and looking for trouble. Wyatt recognized the type immediately, local toughs who enjoyed throwing their weight around. "Ellie," the largest of the 3 called out, his voice slurred. "When are you gonna stop playing hard to get?" Eleanor's face hardened, but her voice remained level. "Evening, Frank. I believe I've made my position clear." "Come on now," Frank pressed, moving toward the bar. "A pretty thing like you shouldn't be alone. Your pa's been gone 6 months. Time to move on." "I'm managing just fine," she replied coolly. "Now, would you like a drink or are you just here to waste my time?" Frank's face darkened. "Don't you talk to me like that, girl. Your pa may have owned this place, but now I do," she interrupted. "And I have the right to refuse service to anyone I please." The tension in the room thickened. The piano player stopped mid-song, and conversations died away as patrons sensed the brewing confrontation. Wyatt remained still, but his hand drifted closer to the revolver at his hip. Frank took another step forward, and Wyatt noticed Eleanor's hand sliding beneath the bar, likely reaching for a shotgun. Before the situation could escalate further, Wyatt cleared his throat loudly. "Seems to me the lady's made herself clear," he said, his voice quiet but carrying across the now silent saloon. "Why don't you boys find somewhere else to drink tonight?" Frank turned, noticing Wyatt for the first time. "This ain't your business, stranger." "Maybe not," Wyatt agreed, "but I've had a long day and I'd prefer to drink in peace." A tense moment passed as Frank sized up the newcomer. Something in Wyatt's steady gaze must have given the man pause, for he eventually spat on the floor and gestured to his companions. "Come on, boys. Place has gone downhill anyway." After they'd left, the atmosphere in the saloon gradually returned to normal. Eleanor approached Wyatt's table again, this time with a room key and a look of measured gratitude. "You didn't need to do that," she said. "I know," he replied simply. She studied him for a moment. "You've used a gun before, not just for shooting game." It wasn't a question, so Wyatt didn't answer. He simply took another sip of whiskey. "What brings you to Unionville, Mr. Garrison?" she asked, changing the subject. "Just passing through," he repeated. Eleanor smiled slightly. "You already said that. Most men who are just passing through have a destination in mind." Wyatt shrugged. "West, I suppose. You've been running a long time, haven't you?" she asked suddenly, her perception cutting through his defenses like a hot knife through butter. His eyes snapped to hers, a flash of surprise breaking through his carefully maintained facade. "What makes you say that?" "I recognize the look," she said softly. "Seen it in the mirror often enough." Before he could respond, she placed the room key on the table. "Room 3, top of the stairs. Breakfast is served from 6 to 8. With that, she returned to the bar, leaving Wyatt with the unsettling feeling that this woman had somehow seen past walls he'd spent years building. The room was simple but clean: a narrow bed, a washstand with a cracked mirror, and a small window overlooking the main street. Wyatt removed his gun belt and laid it within easy reach before stretching out on the bed, not bothering to remove his boots. Sleep came reluctantly, and when it did, it brought the dreams, the same ones that had haunted him for years. Gunfire, blood soaking into thirsty earth, the faces of men he'd killed and those he couldn't save. He woke before dawn, sweat-soaked and breathing hard, the ghostly echoes of screams fading as reality reasserted itself. He splashed cold water on his face and stared at his reflection in the mirror. 32 years old, and his eyes looked like they belonged to a man twice his age. The war between the states had taken his youth, and the years after had taken most of what remained of his humanity. The sound of movement downstairs drew him from his dark musings. He reattached his gun belt and headed down, following the scent of coffee. Eleanor was already up, sweeping the floor while a large pot of coffee brewed behind the bar. She glanced up as he descended the stairs. "You're up early," she observed. "Never was one for sleeping in," he replied. She nodded toward the coffee pot. "Help yourself. Eggs and biscuits will be ready shortly." He poured himself a cup and watched as she moved efficiently around the space, preparing for the day ahead. There was an economy to her movements that spoke of someone accustomed to hard work. "You run this place alone?" he asked. "Mostly," she answered. "Hire extra help for busy nights. My father left it to me when he passed last winter. Most women in your position would have sold it." She paused in her work. "Most men in your position would mind their own business." Wyatt couldn't help but smile slightly at that. "Fair enough." "Besides," she continued, her tone softening, "this place is all I have left of him. Selling it would be like losing him all over again." The honesty in her statement caught him off guard. He was unused to people speaking so openly about loss. In his experience, grief was something to be buried deep, not discussed over morning coffee with strangers. "I lost my folks when I was 16, he found himself saying. "Farm in Missouri. Influenza took them both within a week of each other." Eleanor stopped sweeping entirely now, regarding him with quiet interest. "What did you do?" "Joined the army." It was 1862, and they weren't exactly checking birth certificates. Understanding dawned in her eyes. "You fought in the war." He nodded once, draining his coffee cup and immediately regretting sharing even that small piece of his past. "I should check on my horse, see about getting a replacement." "The livery's at the end of the street," she said, not pressing him further. "Tell Jacob I sent you. He might give you a fair price." Wyatt nodded his thanks and headed for the door. "Mr. Garrison," she called after him. When he turned, she added, "Breakfast will be waiting when you get back." The morning air was crisp, the town just beginning to stir as shopkeepers opened their businesses and miners headed toward the hills that had given Unionville its purpose. Wyatt made his way to the livery stable, where he found a grizzled old man shoeing a bay mare. "Jacob Green?" he inquired. The man looked up. "That's me. What can I do for you?" "My horse went lame about 5 miles outside of town. Need a replacement." Jacob straightened, rubbing his lower back. "Got a few that might suit. What kind of riding you planning to do?" "Hard and far," Wyatt answered honestly. Jacob nodded thoughtfully. "Got just the one for you then. Come see." He led Wyatt to a stall housing a muscular black gelding with one white sock. The horse eyed Wyatt warily, intelligence evident in its gaze. "This here's Midnight. Best horse I've got for endurance. Previous owner was killed in a mining accident. Horse has been waiting for the right rider." Wyatt approached the stall slowly, extending his hand palm up. The gelding sniffed cautiously before allowing Wyatt to stroke his nose. "How much?" Wyatt asked. $40 with saddle and tack," Jacob replied. "Ellie sent you, didn't she? She's got a soft spot for strays, that one." "I'm not a stray," Wyatt said, perhaps too quickly. Jacob gave him a knowing look. "If you say so." He paused. "That'll be $35 then." After negotiating the sale, Wyatt arranged to pick up Midnight the following morning, then retrieved his belongings from his lame horse, which Jacob agreed to nurse back to health and sell for a fair commission. When he returned to the saloon, Eleanor was setting a plate of eggs and biscuits at his table from the previous night. A small group of miners occupied another table, eating breakfast before their shift. "You find what you needed?" she asked as he took a seat. "Black gelding. Picking him up tomorrow." Wyatt hadn't planned on staying another night, but something about this town, or perhaps its unusual saloonkeeper, had him reconsidering his haste. "Midnight." When he nodded, she smiled. "Good choice. He's got spirit. You know horses." "My father taught me to ride before I could walk," she replied. "Used to breed horses before he bought this place." Wyatt ate in silence for a few minutes, the food far better than anything he'd had in months of trail cooking. "This is good," he said finally. "High praise," she teased, but he could see she was pleased. The day passed quietly. Wyatt spent most of it getting the feel for the town, learning its rhythms and assessing potential threats, another habit he couldn't seem to break. He replenished his supplies at the general store, had his boots repaired at the cobbler, and visited the barber for a much-needed haircut and shave. By evening, he found himself back at the saloon, which was considerably more crowded than the previous night. Eleanor moved efficiently behind the bar, assisted by a young man who couldn't be more than 19. She spotted Wyatt and nodded in acknowledgement as he claimed the same corner table. The night progressed without incident, though Wyatt noticed that Frank and his companions had returned, sitting at a table near the bar and watching Eleanor with undisguised interest. Wyatt kept a wary eye on them, but they seemed content to drink and play cards. As the crowd thinned and the night grew late, Eleanor approached his table with a bottle of whiskey that looked considerably better than what he'd been drinking. "On the house," she said, pouring him a measure. "Consider it thanks for yesterday." Not necessary, he replied, but accepted the drink nonetheless. Where are you headed? She asked, taking the seat across from him. California, maybe. Heard there's work there. What kind of work do you do, Mr. Garrison? He hesitated. Whatever's available. Eleanor studied him over the rim of her glass. You don't say much, do you? Never saw the point in talking just to hear my own voice. Yet people reveal themselves in silence too, she observed, sometimes more honestly than with words. Wyatt felt another flash of that uncomfortable sensation, the feeling of being seen. And what do you think my silence reveals? Pain, she said simply. The kind that follows a man like a shadow. He stared at her, unsure how to respond to such directness. Before he could formulate a reply, a crash from across the room drew their attention. Frank had overturned his table, cards and coins scattering across the floor. You cheating son of a, he snarled at one of his companions, drawing his pistol. Wyatt was on his feet instantly, but Eleanor moved faster. She grabbed a shotgun from beneath the bar and racked it loudly. Take it outside, Frank, she commanded. You know the rules. No gunplay in my establishment. Frank's bloodshot eyes darted between Eleanor and his intended target. For a moment, Wyatt thought the man might ignore the warning, but something in Eleanor's steady aim convinced him otherwise. He holstered his weapon with a curse. This ain't over, Pete, he growled at the other man, then stormed out. Eleanor lowered the shotgun, her expression grim. Pete, you'd best find somewhere else to sleep tonight. Frank doesn't forget a grudge. The frightened man nodded and quickly gathered his winnings before slipping out the back door. Happens often? Wyatt asked as Eleanor returned to their table. Often enough, she sighed. Mining towns attract a certain type, men who prefer settling disputes with bullets rather than words. You handle yourself well, he observed. A small smile played at her lips. My father didn't raise a wilting flower. When my mother died, he made sure I could protect myself. Where is he buried? The question surprised even Wyatt himself. If Eleanor found the inquiry strange, she didn't show it. On the hill overlooking town. Why? Wyatt shrugged. Just curious. The truth was, he wasn't sure why he'd asked. Perhaps it was the way she spoke of her father with love unmarred by bitterness, despite her loss. His own grief had curdled into something dark and unrecognizable years ago. As the last patrons filed out, Wyatt helped Eleanor clean up despite her protests. Working alongside her in comfortable silence, he found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't in years. There was something soothing about her presence, a calm certainty that seemed to steady the restless ghosts that constantly circled his mind. You don't have to leave tomorrow, she said abruptly as they finished stacking chairs. Wyatt paused. Pardon? If you need work, I could use help around here, she elaborated. The roof needs patching before winter and the storage room needs organizing. Could be a week's worth of work, if you're interested. He should say no. Staying in one place too long was dangerous. It gave his ghosts time to catch up, gave people time to ask questions he didn't want to answer. Yet the prospect of another day in Unionville, another day in Eleanor's orbit, was strangely appealing. I'll think about it, he said finally. She nodded, apparently satisfied with that non-commitment. Good night, Mr. Garrison. Wyatt, he corrected her. If I'm staying, even for a few days, might as well use my name. Good night, Wyatt, she amended with a soft smile that followed him up the stairs and into his dreams. The next morning, he found himself accepting her offer of employment. He told himself it was practical. He could earn enough money to see him through the next leg of his journey. But as the days passed and he repaired loose floorboards, patched the leaky roof, and reinforced shelving in the storage room, he knew he was lying to himself. He was staying because of Eleanor. She was unlike any woman he'd ever known. Smart and independent, She ran her business with a firm hand while maintaining the respect of the community, no small feat for a single woman in a frontier town. She was well-read, too, often quoting from books he'd never heard of as they shared evening meals after the saloon closed. A week stretched into 2, and Wyatt found himself settling into a routine that felt dangerously like belonging. He moved from the room above the saloon to a small cabin behind it that Eleanor offered at a reduced rent. He began taking his meals with her regularly, their conversations growing deeper as his guard gradually lowered. On a Sunday afternoon, nearly 3 weeks after his arrival, they rode out of town together, Eleanor on her chestnut mare and Wyatt on Midnight, who had indeed proved to be an excellent mount. She led him to a small lake nestled in the hills, a hidden oasis of beauty in the harsh Nevada landscape. "My father used to bring me here when I was a child," she explained as they dismounted. "Said every person needs a place where they can remember who they are." They sat by the water's edge, sharing a simple picnic of bread, cheese, and dried apples. The tranquility of the setting worked its way into Wyatt's bones, easing tensions he'd carried so long he'd forgotten they weren't part of his natural state. "Why did you really come to Unionville?" Eleanor asked, breaking a comfortable silence. "Told you. My horse went lame." "Before that," she clarified. "What were you running from?" Wyatt stared out at the water, considering deflecting as he always did. Instead, he found himself answering truthfully. "Memories, mostly." Eleanor waited, giving him space to continue if he chose. "After the war," he said slowly, "I didn't know how to be a civilian again. Tried farming for a while, but it didn't take. Ended up riding with a man named Colonel Hargrove. He'd been my commanding officer during the war, said he had government contracts protecting settlers." He paused, the memories rising like bile. "Turned out we weren't protecting much of anything. We were hired guns, clearing Native Americans off their land so railroad companies could move in. By the time I realized what we were really doing, I'd already—" He trailed off, unable to voice the atrocities he'd participated in. "You left," she prompted gently, "eventually." His voice had grown hoarse. "Not before I did things I can't undo." They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of his confession hanging between them. Finally, Eleanor spoke. "My father was a violent man before my mother died," she said quietly. "Used to get drunk and beat her. Beat me too when I tried to stop him. After she passed, something in him changed. He sobered up, became the kind, decent man I remember now. But I never forgot those early years, the fear, the pain he caused." She looked at Wyatt directly. "I hated him for a long time. Couldn't understand how someone could change so completely, or if I could ever truly forgive him. But as I got older, I realized something important: we are not defined by our worst actions alone." "Some actions can't be balanced out," Wyatt argued. "Perhaps not," she conceded, "but that doesn't mean we stop trying." As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the lake, they packed up their picnic and mounted their horses for the ride back to town. Something had shifted between them, a deepening of understanding, a strengthening of the invisible thread that had been drawing them together since his arrival. That night, as Wyatt lay in his bed at the cabin, he realized with startling clarity that for the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about moving on. The thought of leaving Unionville, leaving Eleanor, created an ache in his chest that no physical wound had ever matched. The following day brought news that shattered the fragile peace Wyatt had been building. A telegram arrived for Eleanor from Carson City, and the color drained from her face as she read it. "What is it?" Wyatt asked, alarmed by her expression. "Wesley Hargrove," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "He's coming to Unionville." Wyatt felt as if the floor had dropped from beneath his feet. "Hargrove, are you certain?" She handed him the telegram. It was brief. Arriving Tuesday to discuss purchase of Silver Strike Mine. Require accommodations for self and 4 associates. Wesley Hargrove, Western Pacific Railroad. "You know him?" Eleanor asked, studying his reaction. "Colonel Hargrove," Wyatt confirmed grimly. "The man I told you about yesterday," understanding dawned in her eyes. "The one you rode with." Wyatt nodded, his mind racing. "I need to leave before he arrives." "Why, it's been years, hasn't it? Would he even recognize you?" "Hargrove has a long memory," Wyatt replied. "Especially for those he considers traitors." Eleanor's brow furrowed. "You never said why you left his employ." Wyatt hesitated, then decided she deserved the full truth. There was a Paiute settlement near a planned railroad route, peaceful people who'd already been pushed from their original lands. Hargrove's orders were to convince them to move again. His voice grew cold with the memory. "When they refused, he ordered us to make an example of them." Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth. "You mean?" "Most of the men followed orders. I couldn't. I tried to stop it, but I was just one man. In the chaos, I shot one of Hargrove's lieutenants, killed him. Managed to help a few of the Paiute escape, but not enough. Not nearly enough. And Hargrove has been looking for you since. Put a bounty on my head," Wyatt confirmed. $500, dead or alive. Last I heard, it was still active. Eleanor processed this information, her expression shifting from shock to determination. "You can't run forever, Wyatt. I don't have much choice." "Yes, you do," she insisted. "You can stand your ground. Hargrove may be powerful, but he's not above the law." Wyatt laughed bitterly. "Men like Hargrove make the law work for them. The sheriff in Carson City is in his pocket, and I wouldn't be surprised if he's already sent word to the sheriff here." "Sheriff Mills is a good man," Eleanor countered. "He wouldn't arrest someone without cause." "A bounty is cause enough," Wyatt pointed out, "and my word against Hargrove's won't count for much." Eleanor fell silent, clearly troubled. Finally, she said, "What if there was evidence, something that proved what Hargrove had done?" "What kind of evidence?" "I don't know," she admitted. "But there must be something. People who witnessed what happened, documents." Wyatt shook his head. "Anyone who witnessed it is either dead, loyal to Hargrove, or wouldn't be believed." "Then we find another way," Eleanor insisted. "I'm not letting you run again, Wyatt. Not when you've finally started to heal." Her words hit him with unexpected force. He hadn't thought of it as healing, this gradual lightening of the burden he carried. But she was right. In the weeks he'd spent in Unionville, the nightmares had become less frequent, the ghosts less insistent. "I can't put you in danger," he said finally. "Hargrove is not a man who forgives or forgets. If he knew you were helping me." "I can take care of myself," she reminded him. "Not against someone like Hargrove," Wyatt insisted. "He doesn't fight fair and he doesn't lose." A determined look settled over Eleanor's features. "Neither do I." Despite her protests, Wyatt spent that night packing his meager belongings. He would leave before dawn, riding east instead of west to throw off any potential pursuers. The thought of leaving Eleanor created a physical pain in his chest, but the alternative, putting her in Hargrove's crosshairs, was unthinkable. He was saddling midnight when Eleanor found him, her expression a mixture of anger and hurt. "So that's it?" she demanded. "You're just going to disappear without even saying goodbye? It's better this way," he said, not meeting her eyes. "Better for whom?" she challenged. "Not for me. And I don't think it's better for you either." "Eleanor, no," she interrupted. "I've watched you these past weeks, Wyatt. I've seen how the weight you carry has started to lighten. You smile more. You sleep through the night most times. Are you really willing to throw that away and go back to running?" "I'm trying to protect you," he explained, frustration edging into his voice. "I didn't ask for your protection," she fired back. "I asked for your trust, for your presence." "Hargrove will kill anyone who stands in his way," Wyatt warned. "Including you." Then we make sure he doesn't get the chance, she said with quiet intensity. But we do it together. You've spent too long fighting your ghosts alone, Wyatt. Let me help you chase them away. Her words struck something deep within him, a longing so profound it nearly brought him to his knees. How long had it been since someone had offered to stand beside him rather than simply cross his path? Since someone had seen his darkness and not turned away. Why? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Why would you risk everything for someone like me? Eleanor stepped closer, placing her hand gently against his cheek. Because I see who you are beneath those ghosts. A good man trying to find his way back to the light. In that moment, with the pre-dawn sky slowly brightening above them, Wyatt made a decision that would alter the course of his life. He leaned into her touch, covering her hand with his own. If we do this, he said slowly, we do it my way. At the first sign of real danger, you get somewhere safe. A smile spread across her face. We'll see about that. Now come inside, we have plans to make. Over the next 2 days, Wyatt and Eleanor prepared for Hargrove's arrival. Wyatt moved out of the cabin and into a room at the boarding house under an assumed name, growing a beard and altering his appearance as best he could in the limited time available. Eleanor, meanwhile, made discreet inquiries about Hargrove through telegram correspondences with contacts in Carson City. What they learned was troubling. Hargrove's interest in the Silver Strike mine was part of a larger pattern of acquisition throughout Nevada and California. Mines, land, water rights, the Western Pacific Railroad was gobbling up resources at an alarming rate, often using questionable tactics to pressure owners into selling. He's building an empire, Eleanor observed as they reviewed the information. Not just a railroad, but control over everything the railroad touches. That sounds like Hargrove, Wyatt agreed grimly. He always was ambitious. The Silver Strike has been struggling since the main vein played out, Eleanor explained. The owner, Samuel Whitaker, has been looking to sell. But I don't understand why Hargrove would want a failing mine. Wyatt considered this. Could be he knows something Whitaker doesn't. A new vein, perhaps, or some other value to the property. Or maybe it's the water rights, Eleanor suggested. The mine controls access to Johnson Creek, which feeds most of the farms in the valley. The more they investigated, the clearer the picture became. Hargrove wasn't just buying a mine, he was positioning himself to control the entire region's water supply, which would give him leverage over every farmer, rancher, and business in the area. If he succeeds, Eleanor realized, he could essentially own Unionville without actually buying it. Tuesday arrived with a tension that hung over the town like an approaching storm. Wyatt watched from the window of his boarding house room as a fancy carriage, followed by 4 mounted men, rolled down the main street, stopping in front of Eleanor's saloon. Even at a distance, Wyatt recognized Colonel Wesley Hargrove immediately. The years had added silver to his temples and weight to his frame, but he still carried himself with the same military bearing, the same aura of absolute authority that had once commanded men to commit atrocities in the name of progress. 4 men accompanied him, hard-looking individuals who scanned the street with the vigilance of trained killers rather than business associates. Wyatt recognized one of them, a tracker named Dawson, who had been with Hargrove during the Paiute massacre. From his vantage point, Wyatt watched as Eleanor greeted them, every inch the professional businesswoman. She showed them inside, and for the next several hours, Wyatt alternated between pacing his room and watching the saloon for any sign of trouble. According to their plan, Eleanor would play the role of an interested but naive saloonkeeper, extracting as much information as possible about Hargrove's intentions while giving away nothing about her connection to Wyatt. It was a dangerous game, but Eleanor had insisted she could handle it. As darkness fell, Wyatt made his way cautiously to the back of the saloon, using the shadows as cover. Eleanor had left the rear door unlocked, and he slipped inside quietly, making his way to the small office where she had said she would meet him. She arrived 10 minutes later, her face flushed with suppressed excitement. "Hargrove's planning to dam Johnson Creek," she whispered without preamble. "He's already spoken with the territorial governor about it. Once he owns the mine and the water rights, he intends to charge every farmer and rancher for access. That would destroy half the farms in the valley," Wyatt said, appalled. Eleanor nodded grimly. "That's the point. When they can't pay, they'll have to sell to him, naturally, at whatever price he offers. He's already done the same thing in 3 other communities. Did he recognize you? Ask any questions about strangers in town?" "No," she assured him. "He was entirely focused on business. Even invited me to dine with him tomorrow to discuss opportunities for mutual benefit, as he put it." Wyatt didn't like the sound of that. "You're not going." "Of course I am," she countered. "It's the perfect chance to learn more about his plans." "It's too dangerous," Wyatt insisted. "Hargrove may seem charming, but he's a predator. If he suspects you're working against him, he won't," she interrupted confidently. "To him, I'm just another simple woman he can manipulate with a few compliments and promises of prosperity." Wyatt wanted to argue further, but he knew that stubborn look in her eyes. Instead, he focused on their next move. "What about Whitaker? Is he still planning to sell?" "The deal is set to be finalized the day after tomorrow," Eleanor confirmed. "But I think I might be able to delay things. I've sent a message to Samuel, asking him to meet with me tomorrow morning." "What are you planning to tell him?" "The truth," she said simply. "About the dam, about what it would mean for the valley. Samuel may be eager to sell, but he cares about this community. His family has lived here for 3 generations. Their discussion was interrupted by a noise from the corridor. Wyatt tensed, reaching for his gun, but Eleanor laid a calming hand on his arm. "It's just Tomas closing up," she whispered. "But you should go. It's not safe for you to be here long." Reluctantly, Wyatt agreed. They arranged to meet again the following evening after Eleanor's dinner with Hargrove. As he turned to leave, she caught his arm. "Be careful," she said softly. "Hargrove has his men patrolling the town. They're asking questions about newcomers." "I'll be careful," he promised. Then, acting on impulse, he leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to her cheek. "You too." The surprise in her eyes was quickly followed by a warm smile that stayed with him as he made his way back to the boarding house under cover of darkness. The next morning brought complications to their plan. Wyatt was awakened by the sound of raised voices in the street. Looking out his window, he saw a crowd gathering outside the doctor's office. Dressing quickly, he made his way downstairs, where the boarding house owner, Mrs. Peterson, was wringing her hands anxiously. "It's terrible," she told Wyatt when he inquired. "Samuel Whitaker collapsed at breakfast this morning. They're saying it might have been his heart." A cold feeling settled in Wyatt's stomach. "Is he alive?" "For now," Mrs. Peterson replied. "But Dr. Miller doesn't sound hopeful." Wyatt needed to find Eleanor. If Whitaker died, the mine would pass to his son Thomas, who lived in San Francisco and had no ties to Unionville. It would make Hargrove's acquisition even easier. He spotted her across the street, speaking urgently with Sheriff Mills. As if sensing his gaze, she looked up, giving a nearly imperceptible shake of her head a warning not to approach her publicly. Throughout the day, Wyatt gathered information as discreetly as possible. The news wasn't good. Samuel Whitaker was indeed dying, and a telegram had already been sent to his son. More troubling were the rumors about the timing. Whitaker had been in perfect health the previous day, and had dined with one of Hargrove's men last night. By mid-afternoon, Wyatt had seen enough of Hargrove's men patrolling the streets to know they were looking for someone. Whether it was him specifically or just general surveillance, he couldn't be sure, but he kept to the shadows and avoided main thoroughfares. Evening found him watching from a distance as Eleanor, dressed in her finest, entered the town's only restaurant for her dinner with Hargrove. Through the window, Wyatt could see the colonel rise to greet her, all charm and polished manners as he held her chair. The sight of Eleanor smiling up at him, playing her role perfectly, filled Wyatt with both admiration and dread. He didn't like her being so close to danger, yet he couldn't deny she was handling herself with remarkable composure. In the weeks he'd known her, Eleanor Kane had repeatedly proven herself to be far stronger and more capable than he'd initially given her credit for. 2 hours later, Wyatt paced the small clearing behind the livery where they had arranged to meet. When Eleanor finally appeared, her expression was grim. "Whitaker was poisoned," she said without preamble. "I'm certain of it." Hargrove kept mentioning how fortunate the timing was, practically gloating about how Thomas Whitaker has already telegraphed his intention to sell as soon as he arrives. "Did you get any proof?" Wyatt asked. She shook her head. "Nothing direct, but I did learn that Hargrove plans to begin construction on the dam within days of acquiring the property. He's already got workers and materials staged just outside town." "We need to get word to Thomas Whitaker before he arrives," Wyatt said. "Warn him about what's really happening." "I've already sent a telegram," Eleanor replied. "But there's more. Hargrove knows you're here, Wyatt." His blood ran cold. "How?" "He didn't say it directly, but he kept asking if I'd noticed any strangers in town recently. Said he was reconnecting with old friends and had heard one might be in the area." She placed a hand on his arm. "You need to be extremely careful. I think he suspects I know more than I'm letting on." "Then you're in danger too," Wyatt realized. "You should leave town at least until this is resolved." Eleanor's expression hardened. "I'm not running and neither are you. This is my home and I won't let Hargrove destroy it or the people I care about." The fierce determination in her eyes stirred something in Wyatt's chest, a mixture of admiration, fear for her safety, and something deeper he wasn't ready to name. "Then we need a new plan," he said. "Something more direct." They spent the next hour formulating a strategy. If they couldn't stop the sale of the mine immediately, they would focus on gathering evidence of Hargrove's illegal activities, evidence that could be presented to the territorial governor or federal authorities. Eleanor had learned during dinner that Hargrove kept detailed records of his business dealings in a lockbox he traveled with. "If we could get access to those documents," she suggested, "we might find proof of his methods, including what happened to the Paiute settlement." "It's too risky," Wyatt argued. "Breaking into his room would be a death sentence if we're caught." "Then we create a distraction," Eleanor countered. "Something significant enough to draw Hargrove and his men away long enough for one of us to search his room." They settled on a plan. The following evening, when Hargrove and his men would be meeting with the town council to discuss the economic opportunities his railroad would bring, Eleanor would create a commotion at the saloon, a staged fight that would require the sheriff's attention. Meanwhile, Wyatt would use the distraction to search Hargrove's room for the lockbox. As they finalized the details, a twig snapped in the darkness beyond their small clearing. Wyatt drew his gun instantly, pushing Eleanor behind him. "Well, well," came a familiar drawling voice. "Seems like the rumors were true after all." Dawson stepped into the clearing, his own weapon trained steadily on Wyatt. "Garrison, Colonel's been wondering where you've been hiding all these years." "Let her go," Wyatt said calmly. "She has nothing to do with this." Dawson's gaze flicked briefly to Eleanor. "Doesn't look that way to me. Seems she's gotten herself quite involved." He grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. Colonel will be mighty interested to hear about this development. Wyatt knew he had only seconds to act. If Dawson reported back to Hargrove, both he and Eleanor would be in immediate danger. "Eleanor," he said quietly, "step back." To her credit, she did as he asked without hesitation. In the same fluid motion, Wyatt fired not at Dawson, but at the lantern hanging from a nearby post. The clearing plunged into darkness as the light shattered, and Wyatt lunged forward, tackling Dawson to the ground as the man's shot went wild. They struggled in the darkness, each fighting for control of their weapons. Dawson was strong, but Wyatt was fighting for more than just his own life now. With a sudden surge of strength, he slammed Dawson's gun hand against a rock, forcing him to release his weapon. "Wyatt," Eleanor called, and he felt rather than saw her approach. "Stay back," he ordered, still grappling with the tracker. Dawson managed to land a solid punch to Wyatt's jaw, momentarily stunning him. The tracker scrambled for his fallen gun, but before he could reach it, a shot rang out. Dawson collapsed, clutching his shoulder and howling in pain. In the faint moonlight filtering through the trees, Wyatt could see Eleanor standing a few feet away, a small derringer in her steady hand. "I told you I could take care of myself," she said, a slight tremor in her voice the only indication of her distress. Wyatt quickly secured Dawson, using the man's own bandana to bind his wound and prevent him from bleeding out. "We need to move," he said urgently. "When Dawson doesn't report back, Hargrove will send others looking for him." "What do we do with him?" Eleanor asked, gesturing to their captive. After a moment's consideration, Wyatt made a decision. "We take him to Sheriff Mills, tell him everything." Eleanor looked surprised. "You're willing to risk that?" "We don't have much choice," Wyatt replied grimly. "And if Hargrove killed Whitaker, the sheriff needs to know what kind of man he's dealing with." Getting a wounded and unwilling Dawson through town without being seen proved challenging, but they managed to reach the sheriff's office through a series of back alleys. Sheriff Mills, a graying man with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, was understandably skeptical of their story at first. "You're asking me to believe that a respected businessman like Colonel Hargrove is behind Whitaker's poisoning. Based on what exactly?" he demanded after they'd explained the situation. "Check Dawson for poison," Wyatt suggested. "Men like him often carry their tools with them." Sure enough, a search of the tracker revealed a small vial hidden in a secret pocket of his boot, a vial that Dr. Miller later confirmed contained a potent heart-stopping compound. With this evidence and Dawson's reluctant testimony, offered in exchange for leniency, Sheriff Mills began to take their claims more seriously. Still, he was hesitant to move against someone as powerful as Hargrove without more substantial proof. "The lockbox," Eleanor reminded Wyatt, "if we could still get access to it." But their confrontation with Dawson had changed the situation. Hargrove would be on high alert now, and their original plan was no longer viable. "There is another way," Sheriff Mills said slowly. "If what you're saying about the dam is true, Hargrove needs the water rights that come with the mine. What if we could challenge those rights?" "How?" Eleanor asked. "Water rights in Nevada follow the doctrine of prior appropriation," the sheriff explained. "First in time, first in right. If someone can prove they were using the water before the mine claimed it." The Paiute, Wyatt realized. Their settlement was on Johnson Creek long before any mines were established. They'd have the oldest claim. "Exactly," Mills nodded, "but you need surviving members of that settlement to make the claim." "The ones I helped escape," Wyatt said, hope rising in his chest. "They went to join a band near Pyramid Lake if I could find them." "It's a long shot," Mills warned, "and you'd have to move fast. Thomas Whitaker is set to arrive on tomorrow afternoon's stage." Eleanor squeezed Wyatt's hand. It's worth trying. I'll stay here and keep an eye on Hargrove while you ride to Pyramid Lake. Wyatt didn't like the idea of leaving her alone with Hargrove in town, but he recognized it was their best chance. Sheriff Mills agreed to keep Dawson's capture quiet for now, letting Hargrove believe his man was still patrolling the area. Before dawn, Wyatt prepared midnight for the journey. Eleanor met him at the livery, her face etched with worry despite her attempts to appear confident. "Be careful," she said softly. "Hargrove will have men watching the roads." "I'll avoid the main trails," he promised. Then, unable to resist any longer, he pulled her into his arms. "Eleanor, if something happens," she pressed her fingers to his lips. "Don't just come back to me." The simplicity of her request, the depth of feeling behind it, left Wyatt momentarily speechless. Instead of words, he answered with a kiss, gentle at first, then deepening as Eleanor responded with equal passion. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Eleanor rested her forehead against his chest. "I'll be here," she whispered, "chasing away your ghosts when you return." With that promise sustaining him, Wyatt mounted Midnight and rode out of Unionville while the stars still shone overhead. The journey to Pyramid Lake was arduous, requiring Wyatt to push Midnight harder than he would have liked. He avoided main roads, instead following game trails and dry creek beds where possible. By mid-afternoon, he reached the southern shores of the vast lake, where several Paiute bands had established permanent settlements. Approaching cautiously, Wyatt was met with understandable suspicion. A white man arriving unannounced was rarely a welcome sight. He asked to speak with the elders, explaining that he sought survivors from the Johnson Creek settlement. After a tense negotiation, he was led to a small dwelling where an elderly woman sat weaving a basket. Her face was deeply lined, her hands gnarled with age and work, but her eyes were sharp and assessing as she studied him. "I remember you," she said in accented English. "You fought your own people that day, helped my grandson and others escape." Relief washed over Wyatt. "Yes. My name is—" "I know who you are, Wyatt Garrison," she interrupted. "The question is why you have come here now after so many seasons." Wyatt explained the situation in Unionville, Hargrove's plans for the dam, the threat to the valley's water supply, and the legal precedent that might stop him if the Paiute could establish prior claim to the water. The old woman, who introduced herself as Luyu, listened without interruption. When he finished, she nodded slowly. "The man you speak of, this Hargrove, he is the one who ordered our people killed." "Yes," Wyatt confirmed, "and now he seeks to control the waters that have flowed freely since the beginning of time." She shook her head disapprovingly. "Some men's greed has no limits." "Will you help?" Wyatt asked. "We need someone who can testify to your people's prior use of Johnson Creek." Luyu considered this request. "I am too old for such journeys, but my grandson Numu was there that day. He remembers. He can speak for our people." She called out, and a young man appeared in the doorway. Though he couldn't have been more than 12 during the massacre, Numu was now a grown man with the same steady gaze as his grandmother. "You saved my life," he said to Wyatt. "I have not forgotten." "I didn't save enough," Wyatt replied, the old guilt rising. "You saved those you could," Luyu corrected him firmly. "Now you seek to protect others. This is good." After a brief discussion, Numu agreed to return to Unionville with Wyatt. They spent the night with the band, gathering additional evidence of the Paiute's historical use of Johnson Creek, including maps drawn on animal hides showing settlements dating back generations. At first light, they departed, pushing their horses as fast as was safe. Wyatt's concern for Eleanor grew with each passing hour. She had proven herself capable, but Hargrove was dangerous, especially if cornered. They reached Unionville shortly after sunset on the day following Wyatt's departure. The town seemed unusually quiet as they rode down the main street, and Wyatt's instincts immediately signaled danger. His fears were confirmed when they approached the saloon. The doors were closed despite the hour, and no light shone from within. Sheriff Mills' office was similarly dark. "Something's wrong," Wyatt said, drawing his gun. "Stay alert." They dismounted and approached the saloon cautiously. Trying the door, Wyatt found it unlocked. Inside, chairs were overturned and a broken bottle leaked whiskey onto the floor, signs of a struggle. "Eleanor," Wyatt called, fear tightening his chest. A groan from behind the bar answered him. Sheriff Mills lay on the floor, a bloody gash across his forehead. Wyatt rushed to his side, helping the older man into a sitting position. "What happened?" he demanded. "Where's Eleanor?" "Hargrove," Mills croaked, accepting the water Numu offered. "He found out about Dawson, came storming in here looking for you. When Eleanor wouldn't tell him where you'd gone, he took her." Wyatt's blood ran cold. "Took her where?" "The mine," Mills replied. "Said if you wanted to see her alive again, you'd bring him whatever evidence you found at Pyramid Lake." "How long ago?" "About 2 hours, the sheriff estimated. I tried to stop them, but his men got the drop on me." Wyatt helped Mills to a chair. "Are you able to ride?" The sheriff touched his head gingerly. "Might not win any races, but I can stay in the saddle. We'll need help, though. Hargrove has at least 6 men with him." "I know where to find it," Wyatt said grimly. While Numu tended to Mills' wound, Wyatt crossed the street to the boarding house. "Mrs. Peterson" answered his knock, her eyes widening at his appearance. "Mr. Garrison, we've been so worried. There's been such dreadful—" "I need your help, Mrs. Peterson," Wyatt interrupted. "Can you gather as many able-bodied men as possible in the next 15 minutes? Tell them to bring weapons." To her credit, the woman didn't hesitate. "Of course. What should I tell them?" "Tell them Eleanor Kane has been taken by men who mean to steal their water," Wyatt replied. "That should be motivation enough." Within 20 minutes, a group of 15 men had assembled in front of the saloon. Miners, farmers, and shopkeepers, all armed and ready to defend one of their own. Wyatt quickly explained the situation, including Hargrove's plans for the dam and what it would mean for their community. "Miss Kane stood up for all of you," he told them. "Now she needs you to stand up for her." With Sheriff Mills providing what authority he could, they formulated a plan. The Silver Strike mine was located in a narrow canyon about 2 miles outside of town. They would approach from different directions, surrounding the mine entrance before announcing their presence. "Remember," Wyatt cautioned as they prepared to ride out, "Eleanor's safety comes first. No one fires unless absolutely necessary." The moon was high as they made their way toward the mine, traveling without lanterns to maintain the element of surprise. As they neared the canyon, they split into 3 groups. As planned, one led by Sheriff Mills would take the high ground above the mine. Another, led by the blacksmith, would circle around to cut off any escape route. And Wyatt would lead the 3rd group, including Numu, directly to the mine entrance. They dismounted a 1/4 mile out and proceeded on foot, moving as silently as possible through the scrub brush. As they approached the mine, Wyatt could see light spilling from its entrance and hear voices echoing from within. Signaling for his group to hold position, he crept closer, straining to hear the conversation. "Your cowboy's taking his time, Miss Kane." Hargrove's voice carried clearly in the night air. "Perhaps he's decided you're not worth the risk after all." "He'll come," Eleanor's voice replied, steady despite the circumstances. "And when he does, you'll regret ever setting foot in Unionville." A harsh laugh answered her. "Brave words from someone in your position. Garrison always did have a weakness for spirited women. It's what got him into trouble in the first place." Wyatt signaled to Numu, who quickly relayed the message to the other groups using a series of bird calls they'd arranged as signals. When the replies came back, everyone was in position. Wyatt stood and walked deliberately toward the mine entrance, his gun holstered. "Hargrove," he called. "I'm here. Let her go." A moment of silence followed. Then Hargrove appeared at the entrance. Eleanor held firmly in front of him with a gun to her ribs. Despite the danger, her eyes lit up at the sight of Wyatt, and he drew strength from her courage. "Well, well," Hargrove said, a triumphant smile spreading across his face. "The prodigal returns. I've been looking for you for a long time, Garrison." "Let her go," Wyatt repeated. "This is between you and me." "Oh, I think Miss Kane made it her business when she started interfering with my plans," Hargrove replied coldly. "But I'm a reasonable man. You give me whatever evidence you collected from those Indians and maybe we can work something out." "I didn't just bring evidence," Wyatt said. "I brought witnesses, people who can testify to what you did at Johnson Creek and what you plan to do here." Hargrove's smile faltered slightly. "No one would believe a bunch of savages over me." "Maybe not," Wyatt conceded. "But they might believe them, along with your former associate Dawson, and the testimony of 15 upstanding citizens of Unionville who are currently surrounding this mine." As if on cue, Sheriff Mills' whistle pierced the night, and men with rifles rose from their hiding places all around the canyon. Hargrove's eyes darted around, counting the odds, but his grip on Eleanor didn't loosen. "You're bluffing," he insisted. "These people don't care about what happened to some Indians years ago." "No," Eleanor spoke up. "But they care about their homes, their farms, and their future. They care about what you plan to do to their water, and they care about me." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Hargrove's face. One of his men appeared at the mine entrance, looking nervously at the rifles trained on them. "Colonel, maybe we should—" "Shut up," Hargrove snapped. He refocused on Wyatt. "You think you've won. Even if you stop me here, the railroad has a dozen men like me. Progress doesn't stop for sentiment, Garrison." "This isn't about stopping progress," Wyatt replied. "It's about justice. Now let her go, or find out how serious these people are about protecting what's theirs." A tense silence followed as Hargrove weighed his options. Finally, with a disgusted sound, he shoved Eleanor forward. She stumbled slightly but kept her footing, quickly moving to Wyatt's side. "Are you hurt?" he asked softly, not taking his eyes off Hargrove. "No," she assured him, squeezing his arm. Sheriff Mills approached, supported by one of the miners. "Colonel Wesley Hargrove, you're under arrest for the murder of Samuel Whitaker, the attempted murder of a law officer, and the kidnapping of Eleanor Kane." As two men moved to take Hargrove into custody, he made a desperate lunge for his gun. Wyatt was faster, drawing and firing in one smooth motion. The bullet struck Hargrove's shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him to one knee. "Don't," Wyatt warned as Hargrove's hand still inched toward his fallen weapon. "Don't give me the excuse." Something in Wyatt's eyes must have convinced him of the sincerity of the threat, for Hargrove finally raised his hands in surrender. His men, seeing their leader captured and faced with overwhelming odds, followed suit without further resistance. As the townspeople secured the prisoners and prepared to return to Unionville, Eleanor turned to Wyatt, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "You came back," she said simply. "I promised I would," he replied, drawing her into his arms at last. "And Numu?" she asked, noticing the young Paiute man standing nearby. "He came to tell his story," Wyatt explained. "To help stop Hargrove from doing to others what he did to his people." Eleanor approached Numu respectfully. "Thank you for coming. Your testimony will be vital in the days ahead." Numu nodded solemnly. "My grandmother says when you help others, you help yourself. The water that flows through your valley once nourished my ancestors. It should remain free. The aftermath of that night brought significant changes to Unionville and its residents. Thomas Whitaker, upon learning of Hargrove's role in his father's death, not only refused to sell the mine but worked with the town council to establish protections for Johnson Creek that would prevent future attempts to control the water supply. With Numu's testimony and the evidence recovered from Hargrove's lockbox, which included detailed records of similar schemes in other communities, as well as correspondence regarding the Paiute massacre, Hargrove was convicted and sentenced to prison. The Western Pacific Railroad, eager to distance itself from the scandal, abandoned its plans for the region. As for Wyatt and Eleanor, they found themselves at a crossroads once the immediate crisis had passed. Standing together on the porch of the saloon a week after Hargrove's arrest, Wyatt voiced the question that had been weighing on his mind. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. Eleanor studied his face in the golden light of the setting sun. "That depends on you, I think." "Are you still planning to move on?" For the first time in years, Wyatt realized he had no desire to keep running. The ghosts that had driven him from place to place for so long seemed less insistent now, as if Eleanor's presence had somehow quieted them. "No," he said finally. "If there's a reason to stay, I'd like to." A slow smile spread across her face. "I can think of several reasons." "Name one," he challenged softly. Instead of answering with words, Eleanor rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his, her kiss conveying everything that needed to be said. Later that evening, as they sat together in the quiet saloon after closing, Eleanor asked the question she'd been holding since his return. "The ghosts you carry," she said carefully, "will they always be with you?" Wyatt considered this thoughtfully. "I think some ghosts never fully leave us," he admitted, "but they don't have to haunt us either. Maybe they just become part of our story, reminders of where we've been and why we choose to be better." Eleanor took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "Then let me chase them away when they get too loud," she said, echoing her earlier promise. "And let me give you new memories to stand alongside the old ones." "I'd like that," Wyatt replied, his voice rough with emotion. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn day, Wyatt Garrison and Eleanor Kane were married in a simple ceremony on the hill overlooking Unionville, near the resting place of Eleanor's father. The entire town turned out to celebrate, along with Numu and several members of his band, including his grandmother Luyu, who had made the journey despite her age. "You have found your path at last," the old woman told Wyatt as she blessed the couple according to Paiute tradition. "The water of your spirit flows clear again." With Eleanor's encouragement, Wyatt had begun using his military experience for a different purpose, training a volunteer peacekeeping force that helped maintain order in Unionville and the surrounding settlements. Eleanor continued to run the saloon, though she had expanded its offerings to include proper meals and family-friendly gatherings during daylight hours. Together, they built a life neither could have imagined alone, a life of purpose, community, and deep, abiding love. And if sometimes Wyatt still woke in the night, troubled by memories of the past, Eleanor was always there, her presence and touch gently guiding him back to the present, to the future they were creating together. 1 year to the day after they met, Wyatt took Eleanor back to the lake where he had first begun to open his heart to her. As they sat watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and crimson, he presented her with a gift, a small carved wooden box containing a silver locket. "It's beautiful," she breathed, opening it to find a miniature portrait of the two of them that a traveling photographer had taken in town. "I wanted you to have something to remind you of us," he explained, "of what we've built together." Eleanor smiled, understanding the deeper meaning behind his words. As if I could ever forget. I spent so many years running from ghosts, Wyatt said softly, that I forgot how to live among the living. You taught me that again, Eleanor. You gave me back my future. And you gave me a partner to share mine, she replied, leaning against his shoulder as the last rays of sunlight danced across the water. I'd say we're even. Wyatt chuckled, wrapping his arm around her waist. I'd say we're blessed. As night fell over the Nevada landscape, bringing with it a canopy of stars that stretched from horizon to horizon, Wyatt felt a sense of peace he'd once thought forever beyond his reach. The ghosts were still there, perhaps, but they had been transformed from tormentors to teachers, their whispers no longer accusations but reminders of how far he had come. And beside him sat the woman who had made that transformation possible, not by chasing his ghosts away entirely, but by showing him that there was room in his heart for both remembrance and joy, for both accountability and forgiveness. I love you, Eleanor Garrison, he whispered into the quiet night. And I love you, she replied, ghosts and all. In the spring of their second year of marriage, Eleanor gave birth to a daughter they named Hope, a name that captured everything they felt about their future together. As Wyatt held his newborn child for the first time, marveling at her tiny fingers and the wisp of dark hair that already showed signs of her mother's curl, he felt the last of his old barriers dissolve. Life in Unionville continued to evolve. The railroad eventually came, but on the town's terms, bringing new opportunities without the exploitation Hargrove had planned. Wyatt's peacekeeping force became a model for other communities, and Eleanor's saloon transformed fully into a respectable establishment that served as the heart of town gatherings. 5 years after their wedding, they welcomed a son, whom they named Samuel, in honor of Eleanor's father and the man whose death had ultimately brought them together. By then, Wyatt had become as much a part of Unionville as the mountains that surrounded it, his past not forgotten but integrated into the man he had become: a husband, a father, a friend, a protector. On warm summer evenings, neighbors would often find the Garrison family on their front porch, Wyatt with little Samuel on his knee, Eleanor with Hope beside her, all of them watching the sunset and sharing stories of their day. Sometimes, if asked just right, Wyatt would share tales of his travels, carefully edited for young ears but still filled with the beauty and wonder he discovered in his years of wandering. What he never had to explain was why he had stopped wandering, why this place and these people had finally given him the home he'd been seeking all along. Anyone who saw him with Eleanor understood. In her, he had found not just love but recognition, someone who saw past his defenses to the man beneath, who accepted his darkness while believing in his light. And in the life they built together brick by brick, day by day, he found redemption. Not the kind that erased the past, but the kind that gave it meaning, that transformed suffering into wisdom and regret into resolve. On their 10th anniversary, as they stood once again on the hill overlooking Unionville, now with 2 children racing around them, and a community that had become family, Eleanor leaned into her husband's embrace and asked a question. Are they still with you? Your ghosts? Wyatt gazed out over the town that had become his home, at the children who carried his hopes, and finally at the woman who had saved him simply by believing he was worth saving. Sometimes, he answered honestly, but they're quieter now, and they no longer frighten me. Eleanor smiled, understanding as she always did. Because you faced them. Because I stopped facing them alone, he corrected gently, pulling her closer. Because you showed me that even a heart full of ghosts has room for love. As the sun set on another day in the life they had built together, Wyatt Garrison knew with absolute certainty that he had finally found what he'd been searching for all along, not an escape from his past, but a future worth embracing, and someone to embrace it with. And that, he realized, was the greatest gift of all, greater than forgiveness, greater even than love itself. It was the gift of belonging, of home, of peace. It was the gift Eleanor had offered that night long ago when she had looked at a broken cowboy and said, with perfect faith, "Then let me chase them away."